Whether it's combat, track and field, football, cricket or rugby, we're certainly spoiled for choice with weekly sports successes here in Mzansi. Enter our Springbok Women side, celebrating their historic win over Italy this weekend to reach the quarterfinals of the Women's Rugby World Cup in England. News24 Sport editor Lloyd Burnard is here to school us on our women in green and gold.
Just following the numbers, it's quite clear that there is a huge investment from South Africa in what the Bok women are doing. It was comfortably our biggest, followed sporting event of the weekend.
Sure.
And it's not like there was nothing else on. There was live Formula One, there was, football and Currie Cup rugby, and this was comfortably the biggest story of the weekend. So South Africans care, they're invested very clearly, and that's good to see. These women have made it so, they've kind of forced the country to take notice of what they're doing. There might have been some names around there that, people weren't too familiar with, but, they're ensuring that by the end of this competition, people are going to know exactly who they are.
Later in the show, pay back the money. A company returns an irregular payment in millions to the State Pension Administration Agency. And finally, Netflix's Wednesday Season 2 has a new star in Gqeberha's very own Luyanda Lewis-Nyawo.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.
Thanks so much for tuning into The Lead. Listen to now more than 500,000 times. You can rate us 5 stars if you feel like it. Hit like and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. That's to know exactly when our next episode drops. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer. This is The Lead, and this is the South African story. To our top story today, and South Africa's Springbok Women celebrated this weekend like never before with a truly historic win. Their very first triumph over Italy as a first, and their very first qualification into the Women's Rugby World Cup quarterfinals, this time being held in England. Well, it all came down to the wire with a nail-biting 29-24 victory with a bonus point, as I understand it, over the Italians in the city of York on Sunday. Now, the Springbok Women have come a long way since their debut in 2004 with their very first World Cup 2 years later in 2006. Now, joining us in our Cape Town studios to help reflect on their biggest success in some 21 years is our News24 Sport editor, Lloyd Burnard. Lloyd, rugby season in full swing, and here the Springbok Women come out with a truly amazing victory. Never seen anything like this before. How was it to watch the game over the weekend?
It was fun, yeah. Thanks, Graham. Thanks for having me back on here. But, easily the biggest game in the history of Springbok Women's Rugby. We had been looking forward to it all week. Before the tournament, you kind of looked at that Italy game and went, that's the one. You expect South Africa to beat Brazil in their first game, as they did. 66-6 was the score there. You know that France in their final pool game is going to be a tough one. France, I think, are number 4 in the world at the moment, and a very accomplished, experienced team. And you looked at that Italy one and went, that's the one. If South Africa can get a win there, history in all likelihood will be made, and they'll get through to the quarterfinals. It was a fascinating game to watch. South Africa went up, I think, 12-0, 17-5 up as well. Italy, to their credit, kept bouncing back. Their tournament was hanging on the line as well. So they left everything out there right up until the last play of the game. Italy just wouldn't let South Africa get away. So,
I think they were 24 with 10 minutes to go, something
correct,
like that.
Correct, yeah. Italy equalized, and then we were getting the calculators out trying to figure out what a draw would mean for the equations moving forward. And then South Africa scored, I think, 75 minutes. And just a really gutsy performance from the South Africans. A lot of character shown there. Just a refusal to roll over and go away. And really, really nice to see. And South Africa, celebrating, history being made with the first ever quarterfinal.
Who's that one player that sort of sticks out for you at this point?
Yeah, it's difficult because, there are 5 different try scorers on Sunday yesterday. And it really was, and I wrote in the report, it was genuinely a team effort. Libby Janse van Rensburg was the player of the match at fly half. Didn't score any of the tries, but was incredibly solid, both on defense and on attack. And her reaction after the game was just, told you everything you need to know about how much this means. And the other player that stood out was Aseza Hele, the number 8, who's been a big player throughout the tournament and certainly was on Sunday as well. Scored the first try, got things moving in the right direction straight away. A big, physical, imposing ball carrier, very difficult to stop, and really has made the right kind of noise and waves at this tournament and is getting the attention of the kind of international rugby community at the moment. But no, absolutely a team effort. I think you can say that about Brazil as well, though that was a bit one-sided. But there's some experienced players around there now. Nadine Roos is another one who's pedigreed. A lot of them have played sevens as well. So they're kind of across codes, and then more and more you're getting, a few of them, a few players who've had some European experience as well. So I mean, very much a team effort, but individually some big names there too.
Fantastic. Moving into the quarterfinals now. What was the reaction online for the News24 front page, the sport subsection, and just generally people tuning in to get the latest updates? Good audience thus far?
I think that's been the most pleasing thing, because I mean, if you think of how passionately people follow the Springbok men, and we've seen those numbers and reaction on our site, for decades, and specifically under the Rassie era and the last 2 World Cups. I think what was really pleasing about yesterday was seeing, just by following the engagement with the live update that we had on the game and the reaction stories that we've had since the game, and just following the numbers, it's quite clear that there is a huge investment from South Africa in what the Bok women are doing. It was comfortably our biggest followed sporting event of the weekend.
Sure.
And it's not like there was nothing else on. There was live Formula One, there was football and other Currie Cup rugby, and some big Premier League games, and this was comfortably the biggest story of the weekend. So South Africans care, they're invested very clearly, and that's good to see. These women have made it so. They've kind of forced the country to take notice of what they're doing. There might have been some names around there that people weren't too familiar with, but they're ensuring that by the end of this competition, people are going to know exactly who they are.
Very interestingly, before today's chat, you came to me and you were just sort of, briefly explaining how the evolution of the Springbok women's side, how that is sort of comparatively with the Proteas women. Banyana doing so fantastically well in recent years. Where do you sort of sit on that timeline in terms of reaching new highs? This is the first real breakthrough for the Springbok women. Yeah. How does that sort of sit in terms of the timelines that we've seen with Proteas and Banyana in the past?
I think that's what's exciting, because I'm not going to sit here and claim to be an expert on Springbok women's rugby. I don't think there are many journalists who in the country who can, and that's simply because they've had to fight tooth and nail to get any kind of acknowledgement and airtime, and that is happening now. And it reminds me of a little bit what we saw with the Proteas women, call it 10 to 12 maybe 15 years ago, and I remember clearly watching a 2016 Cricket World Cup where you had a 16-year-old Laura Wolfhard, for example, opening the batting, and South Africa kind of stunned the competition and get to the semi-finals that year. And there were a lot of names in that Proteas team sheet who people wouldn't have known too well. Certainly Laura was one of them. And you fast forward now 10, 12 years, there's more professional contracts handed out. There's more money going around the women's game. Some of these stars are household names. They're on billboards. They're on, social media campaigns. And, it's been a slog, but, year by year, the kind of exposure gets greater. And you'd like to think that this is the beginning of something similar happening in the rugby space. It takes, unfortunately, results and performances to bring about the attention and that kind of first impression for people to take notice and say, oh, this is happening and now I'm invested and now I'm going to follow. It does take that kind of initial, performance to catch the attention. And you'd like to think that this is what's happening now with the Bok women's side. It's obviously a long road ahead. I mean, nothing ever happens overnight in this space. And, you start talking about sponsors and investments and broadcast money and, that kind of stuff. And there is obviously a huge gap between what you experience at a Springbok men's level and the Bok women. But this feels like the start of something. The crowds in South Africa have started to get bigger. Supersports come to the party. The Bok women are on TV more and more. A World Cup quarterfinal, whether it's against New Zealand or Ireland, is going to result in a lot of eyeballs on the product.
And I mean, just to sort of put it into a little bit of context, the England women's national rugby team won the World Cup back in 1994. It only took another, couple of years before, our women's side debuted. So it's still going to be a while until we can get to even greater highs, and we're going to obviously hope for that as best as possible. But what was quite interesting for me is funny enough, this game was played in York on Sunday, and I have happened to have been in the stadium just a couple of months prior to watch York versus Grimsby Town, and Grimsby just beat Manchester United recently, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But seeing the level of investment that goes into women's sport overseas, obviously in the United Kingdom, and comparing it to the experience that we have growing up this side, it is quite unbelievable to see that. It's like, what needs to change this side, Lloyd?
You're talking about words like investment and grassroots and facilities, and that's not an obstacle, but it's certainly a big talking point in South African sport, not just at a women's level, but you talk about youth development as well, and it's the same kind of conversation we have. Whether it's the responsibility of government or the associations themselves to ensure that there's facilities and structures in place at a young age to get people playing. There needs to be a pipeline. There needs to be a reward at the end of it all. And I think that's what's important in this context. You need a schoolgirl growing up looking at, the Proteas going, there's a pathway here. I can become that, and I can be successful if I stick with this. I'm not sure that pathway has existed in the rugby space. I'm not sure how many young girls have looked up to the Bok women over the last 20 years and gone, that's what I can do. I hope there are. I'm sure there are. But you'd like to think that number will increase. That something like this leaves people looking up to role models, going, I can do that too. So look, there's a long way to go. Corporates have to come on board. There has to be investment from the unions, the federations themselves, which I think there is. I don't think you can fault SA Rugby too much, certainly from the outside looking in terms of giving, the women's side the structures and the space to develop. And I think you're seeing the results of that probably, now in these results. So no, I think continued investment, continued commitment from stakeholders like SuperSport, to keep showing the games, and the spectators as well to keep buying in. I think those are the, as long as you've got the structures in place where there's IP that's being shared across school level, club level, and there's an existing pathway for players to come up and there's something at the end that they can aspire towards. And hopefully, you're seeing something happening now that is starting to achieve that.
I might sound a little bit naive, but I feel like it's almost as if sort of in the background, surely there must have been like a nice big master plan that Rassie is tucked away somewhere that all the teams get to have a look at one particular point and say, this is how we build a team, right? I hope that there's something that lies around.
You'd like to think. I mean, Rassie was director of rugby, at a pivotal stage of kind of development. So you'd like to think he had some role to play in all of this. But I mean, Swys de Bruin is going to be the guy who gets all of the kind of plaudits, and rightly so. I mean, he's been in that role for a little over a year now, and the improvement that you've seen in the women's side is clear. And with Bafana and Hleko there with him as well, it just looks like a coaching staff that's kind of getting the best out of their players. And Swys is obviously a guy who's coached at the absolute highest level. He was very close to being the attack coach for the men's team at the 2019 World Cup, and was the attack coach for that side up until about a year before the tournament. So comes with a lot of experience and pedigree and expertise, and I think it must be rubbing off on the players.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News24 with Graeme Raubenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
How's it? Welcome back. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer. I'm a host of The Lead, in conversation with our News24 Sport editor, Lloyd Burnard, following a truly historic win on behalf of the Springbok Women over in York this past weekend, triumphing over Italy, a first in their careers. This particular side's only been around since 2004, and finally, some 21 years later, they're reaching new heights in the sport. It's fantastic to see. Let's pick up the conversation now. I didn't know, for example, we were speaking about earlier, Libby Janssen van Rensburg was in actual fact the 2023 Springbok Women's Player of the Year. I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
obviously this win would mean a whole lot more for her, right?
Yeah, well, that's what it is. Kind of forcing yourself into the conversation. That performance yesterday means that us as a news organization, I mean, we're covering the tournament, we're treating it seriously. It's a national team at a World Cup. We're always going to assign resources to it and take it very seriously. But the fact that what they did yesterday, the way that they won. That means they go to the top of the page. That means that we are now scrambling around for, commissioning opinion pieces and analysis pieces and columns and reaction. And we're phoning people who know these players and people who were there at the beginning in 2026. We're getting hold of them to talk to us about how the game's developed over the last 20 years. And that's all down to their performance. They've forced themselves into the conversation. No one's done them any favors. They've created all of this hype and gotten them the type of attention they're receiving now. They've done it themselves. And I think a lot of credit's due. Whenever a team kind of rises above the odds, forces themselves into the conversation and the headlines, smashes down the barriers in front of them. I mean, that's, as South Africans, that's what we love to see. So, full credit to the players and to Sway's the Brain. We don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the tournament. This might be, a quarter final against the All Blacks is incredibly tough. So let's see what happens. But certainly they deserve all the praise they're getting.
How well are women's rugby games globally attended? Are the stands full more so overseas? And do you have anything to compare it locally?
Look, I think it depends on the opposition. Well, the competing teams. If I think for South Africa, when we had that New Zealand 15 side come over to Athlone Stadium, it was a pretty decent turnout. I think what they've done well with this World Cup is that they've utilised the smaller venues. You were talking about York, and the final will be at Twickenham, and hopefully packed, which will be a great spectacle.
Yes.
But as far as I know, that's the only game of the competition at Twickenham. And, they're utilising kind of the 15,000 seaters, the 18,000 seaters, 11,000 seaters. I think York was around 10.
Yeah, it's very small.
Yeah, which creates an incredible kind of atmosphere, because that place looked heaving, and you've only got about 10,000 people there. So, no, I think England's done very well to kind of create that atmosphere. By utilizing some of the smaller stadiums. I wonder what that would look like in South Africa if we got to do that World Cup, because we've got all of our, white elephants, for lack of a better term, that they call all the 2010 venues scattered around the country, which are huge. So no, I don't know. I don't have any data in terms of like what these crowds look like globally. But I think from what I've seen at this World Cup, it's been impressive. Most of the games. I mean, I think it was also at York. I watched the USA and Australia played to a 31-all draw on Saturday.
Sure.
That was superb. It was such a good game. USA's tournament also on the line, and that crowd just with both sets of supporters packed and just heaving, and that's a small-ish venue as well. But I mean, really probably going to go down as the game of the tournament, depending on what happens for the rest. Yeah.
So let's map out the Springbok Women's, next run of fixtures. I think we're playing France next. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And, that's a game now to determine who finishes top of the log. Qualification is secured. So the Boks are through to the quarterfinals. The France game will be tough. I think, I don't think South Africa have ever beaten France before. No, they've played 5 times. And I think there's a draw in there, and South Africa have lost 4 of those games. France are also the number 4 side in the world. South Africa is currently 12th. So yeah, the Boks will enter that as clear underdogs. I think it's difficult.
It's weird to hear.
Yeah, it is weird to hear. But I think it's when a team's on the up like this and in territory that they've never been in before. How much does the ranking really matter? How much do the past results really matter?
That's a good point.
Whatever shape they're in right now is what matters, right? And I mean, they're in the best shape they've probably ever been in, with more momentum behind them than they've probably ever had. So, might as well throw out I'm not no head coach, but I mean, that would be my kind of, advice is throw away the record. Don't worry about that too much. I mean, focus on the now. But let's say that South Africa finish second and lose to France on the weekend. Then their quarterfinal, which will be in Exeter, whether they finish top or second, and they will play France and Ireland and New Zealand play the final pool game there.
Tough.
So we will play if South Africa wins the pool, they'll play whoever comes second in that pool. If we come second in the pool, we play whoever wins that pool. So if we come second, the chances are we're going to play New Zealand in the quarterfinals, which is about as tough as it gets. They've won I think 6 out of the last 7 of these things.
Are you joking? So the New Zealand women's rugby team is the best.
They are the best. They're not ranked number 1 in the world right now, funny enough. But in terms of winning the World Cups, they've comfortably the most successful nation, and I think it's 6 out of the last 7 editions that they've won. South Africa had some experience against New Zealand a couple of months ago when they came just before the World Cup, but that was called a Black Ferns 15, and it was far from a first choice New Zealand outfit. There were a lot of second team and even third team players, and there was South Africa did win that game though, so there's a bit of confidence there. But I mean, Ireland, I think Ireland's ranked number 5 in the world. South Africa's, they've only met once before. South Africa lost that game. You'd obviously fancy your chances against Ireland more than you would against New Zealand. Who knows, man? Something special could happen. Maybe that France game this weekend, you just find a way over the line there. Then you play Ireland in the quarters instead of New Zealand, and then, rumble Ireland in the quarters, and then you're in a semi.
Who's New Zealand's rivals in the women's side?
Well, I mean, just looking at the rankings. I mean, England are one of the historical powerhouses as well.
Yes,
they're currently top ranked, and then surprisingly, Canada is the second ranked side in the world presently. So, New Zealand 3rd in the world at the moment, France 4th, and Ireland 5th. I think South Africa in a distant 12th, puts all of this into a bit of perspective as well.
I think even if I just double check, just do a cursory little Google, I think it was Canada versus Wales that I also saw very randomly the Canada 42, Wales 0.
There you have it.
In the Women's Rugby World Cup. And I was like, I had to quickly adjust my eyes to see what was happening there, which is great. Yeah. That's great.
No, it's been super fun to watch, seeing nations and players that you're not too familiar with. And I mean, just really good rugby as well. It's been, I mentioned that USA-Australia game. I mean, just proper competition. I mean, I couldn't take my eyes off it. So, no, it's been a good product. I suppose you'd like a bit more depth, maybe. I mean, but it's the same as the Men's World Cup. You see the Men's World Cup come around, and you get the minnows that play, and you got the All Blacks playing against, Chile or Portugal or something, and you just know it's going to be.
Or Canada, remember that? They destroyed them lots of times before.
But no.
So I love the minnow sides. It's always makes for interesting watching. The underdog story is always lacquer. And we've got the perfect sort of underdog story. Who knew that it is our Springbok women's side? Yeah. There's even calls now, Lloyd, I don't know if you saw this morning, to give them their own name.
Yeah, why not? Springbok Women can only get us so far. They're going to need something. If there is one, I'm not aware of what it is. But no, what's wrong with just Springboks,
Yeah, also because it's a huge honor to obviously play in the green and gold, right? So why change something that already has such a lot of prestige?
100%, yeah. No, I think Springboks works just fine. But let's see. No, it's been incredible to see. And I mean, just the reaction, seeing the country kind of respond to this. No one quite celebrates sporting successes like we do. And once you put yourself in a position as a South African where you could achieve something, that's all it takes for people to invest. You don't have to be the biggest sprinting fan in the world or really know what's going on in the world of athletics, but if you're lining up for a world championship final and there's 2 South Africans in there, then suddenly we're paying attention. We buy in very easily and very quickly, and all it takes is that little spark of belief to happen. And I think that's what's happening now. I suspect this is going to be a tournament that really sets up women's rugby for the years to come.
Yeah, no, let's hope that, they get sponsored and more endorsements and get seen in all the adverts and the pop culture that we know of South Africa today, right?
Exactly,
and that propels it further and gives it more impetus. It's really lacquer to see, and we're living in fortunate times when it comes to sport. We really are spoiled here in South Africa.
The difficulty with the the difference, because we made the comparison with the Proteas earlier, the thing with the Proteas is that, with the 100 and the women's IPL and the women's Big Bash, there's other places to go as a competitor outside of the Proteas space where they can make some money and be successful. And that is one concern, if you go where outside of the domestic scene here in South Africa, where the Bulls Daisies are by far the benchmark of the women's game. I mean, they've professionalized women's rugby far before any of the other unions have, or at least have taken the right steps towards doing so. But outside of that, if you accept that there's still a fair way to go to professionalize domestic women's rugby in South Africa, then if you are a domestic women's player in South Africa, where else can you capitalize on your ability and your skills? Whereas in the cricket space now, there are other places to go and make some money away from the national setup and the South African setup. And that is one concern. You know, it's kind of all fully in the hands of funding that comes from within South Africa. So that's going to be something to look at.
But I think we also, as men, just very generally speaking, we also need to rewire our thinking a little bit when it comes, it's not just, you know, the Currie Cup and whatever, the Rugby Championship, and those are the only things we're going to watch from the men's side. We also need to make a point of, hey, let's all tune in for the finals if we do make it that far, and let's tune in for the France game, and actually make it part of our calendars for the weekly sporting events, because it's huge. And I've seen that already, as you said, with the Protea women's side. That's come on in more recent years. I'd say the past year and 2 years or so has become a little bit more ubiquitous with the thinking of the sporting chats we're having around the braai, etc., etc. Exciting stuff. You've also got Inside Pass, another podcast on News24, where it's been following closely the Rugby Championship. Very quickly, while I have you on, looking towards the big game with the All Blacks this weekend. How are you feeling, bro?
No, it's going to be fun. You know, we've got Kaniso Chwaku over there for News24, Kobus Klaassen over there for Netwerk 24, and they both, they're at it already. They've been filing for the last 2 days, sitting in with Rassie this morning. It's just a huge game. The biggest Bok game of the year, easily, I would say, this Saturday against the All Blacks at Eden Park, you know, trying to overturn that kind of 50-game streak that they have going on there. It doesn't really get much bigger than that. So
sold out already.
Of course. Jeez, I mean, when will South Africa, New Zealand not be, regardless of where you host it? A huge week for Springbok Rugby. Looking forward to that. We'll be on Wednesday. We'll be checking in with Kaniso in Auckland. He'll give us a sense of what's going on the ground, what the Bok hotel's like, what training's looking like. Lots to discuss. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. That's News24 Sport editor Lloyd Burnard. It's in our blood. Springbok women break new ground on World Cup dream run. Lloyd, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, Graeme.
Trending topic.
Moving to our trending topic now, we've got an update on News24's series of investigations into the Government Pension Administration Agency following revelations that it awarded a company millions to lease out a building for a decade that the company simply had zero control over. Investigative journalist Sikonati Manchancha reports that Shula Developers has now paid 36 million rand back to the agency, but without any interest, which should have included an additional 4 million rand price tag. Well, it's understood that these funds re-entered the agency's bank account on the 22nd of August. It's the very same day that the finance minister had suspended its chief executive, Gqeberha Madie, over evidence of irregular spending to the tune of at least 1.6 billion rand, including the ghost building lease we've just spoken about, the building's redesign and ICT contracts. Staff have even been targeted for speaking out against these questionable payments. Stadium Mngomezulu, though, is the new acting CEO, and as we know, now has the power to discipline alleged wrongdoers. We'll keep you posted on the lead. In the meantime, check out Sikonati's latest report, still trending on the front page of News24, for a whole lot more on his expert investigation.
Listen Up is News24's sharp new podcast, where hosts Tim Cohen and Mark Barnes cut through the clutter with bold takes and unfiltered insight.
They're not fighting for the good of South Africa, and so this has degenerated into a series of tit-for-tat spats. How's that for a bit of poetry early in the morning?
Smart, punchy, and unapologetically real.
President Ramaphosa has explained why he did it, and the reason he did it was because he said that people weren't allowed to go to America, and then Andrew Whitfield did, and then there's a dispute about whether or not he asked.
Catch new episodes of Listen Up every Tuesday on News24 or wherever you get your podcasts.
I know a lot about this. Not really.
Yeah, there we go.
Here goes.
The accused for a change. Yeah.
And finally,
And finally, another star South African actor is making their mark in Hollywood these days. Gqeberha's very own Luyanda Lewis-Nyawo, who performs as Sheriff Santiago in Season 2 of Netflix's Wednesday series, that's a spin-off of The Addams Family, says she knew when she starred in her school's rendition of The Jungle Book all those years ago that acting was the passion they'd be pursuing all their life. Well, she studied at our National School of Arts. It's the very same that once taught Charlize Theron, before training at London's Royal Central School of Drama. But this journey was not easy. She dropped out of some acting schools along the way, and it was only really until she discovered Josie-based director Dorothy Ann Gould and community theatre sessions that she managed to find her way over to the UK. Luyanda's even cast in an upcoming fighting video game called 2XKO, where she says she lends her black South African voice to a tentacled character named Ilayo. Well, for the full interview, check out Constance Khanahomo's story under our News24 Arts and Entertainment section. This is The Lead. This is the South African story. On this day in history, the 1st of September 1853, happened to be the date that the very first adhesive postage stamp in Africa, the entire continent, was issued here in the Cape of Good Hope, at the time a British colony. The triangular-shaped stamp became known as the Cape Triangular. The stamp was designed by Charles Davidson Ball, who was the Surveyor General of the Cape Colony at the time. The stamps depicted the reclining figure of Hope in homage to the Cape of Good Hope. The triangular shape of the stamp was a unique design for a stamp during this time. Sir George Cathcart, convener at the Cape, had proudly commented on how the stamps looked completely different to the British ones. The Cape Triangular appeared in two values, the 4p blue and the 1p red, and could be used to pay inland post only. The first adhesive stamp ever to be issued in the world was the British penny black. That was back in 1840, which depicted Queen Victoria's head against a black background and had a denomination of 1 penny. A centenary edition of the Cape Triangular was later issued on the 1st of September 1953, which included the original design on a rectangular stamp in sepia and vermilion. That's courtesy South African History Online on this day in history, the 1st of September 1853. Got anything on your mind about today's topic? Send us a voice note down to 072-562-3179, our official The Lead WhatsApp line. Hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels to be notified as to when our next episode drops. 3 more for the rest of this week to come. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have The Lead.